So today on the podcast, I have the pleasure of speaking with Ferol Vernon, co-founder and COO of Written Word Media, a tech-enabled platform for authors and publishers. So basically, it's like a matching service for authors and readers. Now, he spent much of his career working with ventures that democratize writing and music, including Reverb Nation, BandLab, and for the past 8 years, as of this recording, on his own ventures. So Ferol, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Exciting to be here.
Wonderful. Well, listen, I hope I didn't give too much away in the intro, but let's start with how Written Word Media got started. What was the inspiration behind this business idea?
Yes, Written Word Media, really started and still is in a lot of ways a family company. So I run the company with my wife, and it started really with her mom, my mother-in-law, and she wrote a book. A lot of people listening probably have someone in their orbit who's written a book, so they're familiar with the process. And so she wrote this book. She looked to her daughter and her new husband, tech people younger on the scale, in the industry to help her promote this book. And we're like, yeah, no problem, we can do this. And turns out we could not. It was hard to sell a book. Hard, in fact, even to give it away for free. And so what we did is we built a little website that gave away books for free. We found some other free books just by Googling for them. And then we slipped in my mother-in-law's book to try to get some free copies given out for some promotion. And that was kind of really the origin. So we had this little site called Free Booksy, which is still one of our sites today, but it was very much a one-off side project. And sort of what happened over the next couple of years while I was working full-time at Reverb Nation, helping artists building software for bands, my wife was doing online marketing consulting. And so this little website that she had, she started sending Facebook traffic to it. Like, this is in the early days of Facebook ads and Pinterest ads and all that stuff.
You could still get traction with Facebook ads.
Oh yeah, it was the good old days. Things were cheap. And so she didn't have to spend much money, and slowly the audience started to build, and authors started writing in saying, hey, can we pay to be on this website? And, for anybody who's listening, who wants to start a company, when that happens, just say yes, figure out how to do it later. So that's what we did. And then she ran the company as sort of part of her consulting business for a few years. And when it was big enough, we looked at it, and I quit my job. We reincorporated as Written Word Media and built some technology to scale it. And that was, 8 short years ago.
Wow, that's amazing. And these are, you work mostly with fiction or nonfiction authors?
Yeah, mostly fiction. So our business, Written Word Media, we sell ads to authors right now. So it's a membership platform. Part of that platform is that you can buy promotional slots that help you sell books. The product works really, really well. So we have a ton of repeat business. Authors can pay us a really small fee, $50, $100, whatever, and run their ad, and they actually sell copies. And that's sort of the hard part. And then the way that they sell copies is that we spend a lot of time and money building up our reader audience. We have about 1 million readers across various properties. And so the authors have access to that audience through our platform. And so that's sort of how it works. And who reads a lot and who writes a lot in America right now is fiction. So we do nonfiction, but I would say probably 95% of our business is in the fiction genres.
Interesting. So if you want to write the great American novel, the next one, that was the place to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, I mean, as like many entrepreneurs, it seems that you've learned a lot over the years. And I'm sure that, like many of us, you tried a few things that didn't work along the way. So what would be some of the top lessons that you feel that you've learned from the good old school of hard knocks?
There's a lot to pick from. We've made a lot of mistakes, especially in the early days, but I would say winging it doesn't work. And what I mean by that is just trying real hard tends to have diminishing returns very, very fast. So in the early days, we were starting this business. We had very few employees. It was mostly contractors and, Google Docs, you had no stuff. And we were just working our tails off. And that does help, but you get to a point where you're not making any progress, and you need to actually hire people. You need to implement process. You need to have documentation of things. And a lot of times entrepreneurs, who tend to be, and I'm generalizing here, but who tend to be excitable, optimistic, ambitious people sometimes look at the process stuff as like, oh, that's dragging me down. Like that's not what I want to do. And I think that's a really big mistake. If you're trying to build a business that actually will grow, some of the process stuff, some of the documentation, some of the systems, talking about that openly with your team and your co-founders, whoever it may be, it really makes a huge difference in terms of getting everybody on the same page. So I would say the biggest mistakes are like not looking at process early enough. And that's certainly one that we made.
So define early, like take me back to maybe there was a point in time when you were small and as a founder, like you said, wide-eyed, excited, like every founder, about your idea and just putting your whole heart and soul into it, feeling like you had to micromanage everything. What changed for you? Tell me about that moment where you went, maybe this isn't the way.
Yeah. So I think, first of all, and most people that have run a business have experienced this, stuff starts to slip, right? So in the very early days, when you're a detail-oriented person like me and you got your fingers in everything, stuff goes great. And then as you grow your team, you have more and more people, all of a sudden you look at something that used to be fine and they're like, oh, why isn't that happening? Or that dropped, or that slipped, or that fell off. And you start hearing those things in your organization. And that's like a trigger for like, oh, something's wrong here. And so, in the early days, I'd say probably when it was about 6 people is when we started to make some of these changes. The real time for us was when we implemented what's called EOS, which is the Entrepreneur Operating System. There's a book called Traction that anybody can read. And basically it was a set of principles for running your business, a set of systems. And I was, I was joking earlier about people that, are poo-pooing that. And I was one of those people. I was like, oh, we don't need this. Like, this is too much structure. It's bogging me down,
Getting in my way.
But we did it, and I sort of begrudgingly said yes. And we saw results almost immediately. So the minute everybody has a framework for understanding what everybody's supposed to be doing and what their job is and what they're supposed to be accountable for, like, it's crazy to me how effective that was. Because you think about these things as soft skills, right? And I have a lot of hard skills. I come from a school where like, I'm in Photoshop, I'm writing code, I'm doing a spreadsheet, like I can do all the things. And I'm like, oh, that's soft stuff, that's for somebody else. But the truth is, if you're an entrepreneur, it's for you, right? Both are important. So I think that was really the moment for me when like things were starting to slip, at every staff meeting, be like, well, I guess that dropped. And you're just like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And when we started putting in structure and we started putting in EOS and tracking numbers in a consistent way, things really turned around and very, very quickly. And what that enabled us to do is be less scared about hiring more people, because when you see things are slipping and you're worried about the business, then you're like, gosh, can I really afford to put somebody else on payroll? And once you feel like you have that framework in place and that everybody that's working with you, whether they're a contractor or an employee, whatever, they all kind of know what to do and what's going on, then it makes you feel a lot more comfortable putting somebody else in there.
So without, obviously we're not trying to pitch one methodology over another, but clearly there's some principles with that one that are tried and true. Like tell me a little bit about like, you read the book, you took the course. I don't know how exactly you got your head wrapped around this methodology, but what did you do first? Like, what were some of the things that you actually implemented?
So that's a great question. And what I'll say before I answer is that, I'm a big believer in a system, but it really doesn't matter which one it is. So like EOS is a great one. That's the one that we use, but other people use other systems. It doesn't really matter, but just make sure everybody's on the same system, right? You can't have like marketing doing this and operations doing that and finance doing this, right? It's all got to be one thing. So, and I'm not saying EOS is better than every other system, but it's worked for us. And one of the big tenets of it is what's called scorecard. And scorecard is where you look at the same set of numbers every week, right, at a meeting. And that was something we before we implemented EOS, we would do these one-off reports and be like, oh, how is that like sales thing doing? Like, let's run the report on that. And those numbers were looked at like whenever I remembered them. And like, that's not good.
Had time at midnight on a weekend to put them together.
Exactly. Like it's not structured. And so And it's too long, right? We go 2 months before we looked at these sales numbers, and then it's too late to make an adjustment. So scorecard is every week. It's the same time. And you look at the same set of numbers. And I think per EOS, you're only supposed to have 10, but we always have more, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is you're looking at the same set every single week with the same people. And so if they go down, you notice right away. You're never more than 6 days away from a number moving. And that was really eye-opening for us. I think, it really changed a lot of how we do it. And the second thing I would say is a lot of times you confuse the people with the role. And the way EOS speaks about this is their seats. And so, for example, like, I'm one of the founders and the COO, but I also am still managing IT. So I'm also still sitting in the IT director seat, right? But that's the seat that I'm sitting in when I do that function. And so if somebody needs a new computer, it's not that they have to ask the founder for a new computer because I approve everything. It's because the IT director needs to approve that. And, fortunately or unfortunately, I'm still doing that job.
So at some point you are no longer the IT director as you scale in theory, but that seat is filled by a very specific function, it sounds like.
Yeah. And so like one person can sit in a lot of different seats, and sometimes people call that wearing different hats. But, it's really important to think about it that way. And it changes the conversations you have, because people are like, okay, well, sitting in the CFO seat, like your budgets don't look like XYZ, you know what I mean? Or sitting in this seat. And so when you're a small company, most people have more than one job, and that's really okay. But a lot of times you can think, well, that person's not really doing a good job. And it's like, well, are they not doing a good job in seat A or seat B? And then
hiring and everything a lot simpler.
Exactly. Right. And so we have what's called an accountability chart instead of an org chart, similar, but it has all the seats instead of the people. Right.
Interesting. So does it have the seats and it doesn't have the people's names, and people just know which seat they go into, or how does that?
It has people's names on it. So like my name's in a couple different seats, and that's pretty common. Yeah.
Okay. So talk to me a little bit more about the scorecard, because that's something that you do hear repeatedly in a number of different systems. And, one of the things I think that a small business has to, or, they struggle with a certain transition from, keeping all the numbers to themselves to how much do I share with my team? Talk to me a little bit about that balance.
Yeah, I mean, my philosophy, which, maybe isn't for everybody, is you really got to let go of this stuff. It's not appropriate to share people's salaries. But like, most of the rest of the numbers people need some visibility into. And I think, sort of there's the financial and HR numbers, and those, you have to understand a certain set of things in order to be able to interpret those properly. So it's appropriate to keep those private. But like, website metrics, sales numbers, a lot of that stuff, I think you'd be surprised at how it doesn't really matter how much experience somebody has. It's helpful for them to have that context, right? And so we, with our entire staff, every week we look at a huge set of numbers. We go through them pretty quickly, but everybody kind of knows what they should be and what they shouldn't be. And when there's a number that's down, because the whole team is conditioned like this, they'll do the research before the meeting. So it's like, hey, why that number was down because of X, Y, and Z. So there's never
they're not being presented the dashboard in the meeting. This is a live thing.
They're filling it out, right? We look at it together, but typically, and we have an amazing team. So like everybody's really on top of this stuff. And like when a number comes in that's off, I would say 9 times out of 10, somebody has an explanation for it. Or if they don't, they've tried to get one and they need help. And then that's a great forum to, help people out and be like, here's how to get that number, or let's take this offline and we'll fix it together. But it's really powerful. I think there's some other systems out there like OKRs. I think maybe Google uses, I don't know the names, but like, it's a pretty consistent thing you see looking at numbers, the same numbers on a regular basis. Getting into that habit of doing that rigorously makes a pretty big difference.
So I'm sure there's a lot of entrepreneurs who are listening and thinking, well, that sounds great, but I just can't picture getting my team to that level. They're not numbers people, whatever the blocker seems to be. How did you transition? Like, so, and again, I'm just very curious about, I know you took the course, you read the book, you did whatever. And then did you walk in one day and go, okay, team, here's what we're going to do. What was your change management approach to implement the system?
So that's a really good question. For EOS specifically, there are people out there called EOS implementers, and these are business coaches who are trained in this very specific function. They're typically excellent. They're typically also very expensive. And they come in and they do sessions with your leadership team and your team, and they help you get it set up. So we did not do that. We did what's called self-implementing, and it was just because we were small. We just simply couldn't afford it. These people that I met and I talked to, like, they were really pretty good. Like, I haven't met any of them, and I'm just like, oh, that person's terrible. But they just, they're really expensive. They have a valuable
At that
set.
point, you don't even know if it's going to work yet. So
Yeah,
it's
totally.
it's a little scary.
So we self-implemented, and the key word probably for your listeners is gradual. Like, it took a long time and we didn't rush it. And so we did like scorecard, and it was just in like a spreadsheet at first, and that was fine. And then slowly now we use a software called 90 that's built for EOS, and that's a little better. And, we didn't start with the accountability chart. We're like, okay, now we need to do that piece, and now we need to do this piece. So we read the book, we talked to our like friends and colleagues, other people that run companies. I'm coming at you from the Raleigh-Durham area. The entrepreneur community here is incredible. It's really supportive. In the Valley, New York, some of these other places, there's maybe more concentration, but it's a little more competitive and a little less collaborative. And in this area, there's just a lot of really great people to help you out. And so we were able to, with our sort of personal connections and reading the book and just trying stuff out to get it in ourselves. And now everybody that we hire, that's part of their onboarding. And you mentioned something that I do want to address about, like, oh, they're not numbers people. And that's like a real pet peeve of mine. And we do have people that say that to me, and I tell them, that's not going to fly here. That basically, like, you can be a numbers person. Everybody can be. It's like maybe uncomfortable for you, but I'm not asking you to do advanced calculus. This is filling in numbers and looking them up, and we can support you and teach you how to do that. And I think what you'll find is that most people have an emotional or mental block around numbers that has nothing to do.
You didn't do well in math in high school, then.
Which is a terrible barometer of whether or not you're good at this thing. And so you have to convince people that, like, hey, you can do this. I can help you do this. You are good enough. You are smart enough, because they are almost always smart enough and good enough, right? But they have this mental block. Somebody told them that high school experience, like, oh, I'm not a math person, I'm not a numbers person, right? Because I like dance or I like art, so I'm an art person. And it's like, it's totally baloney, right? Like, you can do both. I have to do a lot of coaching, especially with our younger staff, to kind of iron that out of people. And our whole team now does it, and it's really great. But the I'm not creative or I don't know numbers, like, I have very little patience for that, and we address it very quickly.
Interesting. Well, and it sounds like one of the things, if I'm understanding this correctly, is that it's important for, I guess, whoever is accountable to the number to actually look up and enter the number in the scorecard. So you're not just presenting something to people that they might glaze over and go, yeah, well, they have, like, they actually have to own that number. Is that am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, and it depends on how your organization's set up. So, like, as the leader, you can change this however you like. But, like, I think in true EOS fashion, that person's supposed to sort of be accountable for making that number go up, right? And that's sort of like a sales team has to hit targets. That's kind of the idea behind it. That's not exactly the way we do it. We have so many numbers because we're a media company that, really, it's people are sort of accountable for watching them, right? So it's not a big deal if the number goes down, but it's a big deal if you miss that it went down. And that's different for everybody. And for, somebody in marketing, a revenue target might be really appropriate. And if they're missing, then that's a performance problem. But you don't have to be, you can implement it how you want to implement it and run your business how you want to run your business, but the guides and the mechanisms are helpful.
Interesting. Well, so let's talk a little bit more about the people aspect of scaling and leadership and some of the implications there. So, at some point, as you mentioned, when you're a business owner, it's kind of you as the center of the world, and everybody's coming to you for everything. So that obviously leads to the micromanaging, and maybe you've got some people that you bring on that are able to do some of that for you. But for any of the entrepreneurs listening, like, to talk me through moving from the process of moving from the founder being in the center to leading teams of people and sort of separating themselves, because even separating themselves from from employees and maybe even separating themselves from clients or customers as well. So talk to me a little bit more about that transition and what your experience has been there.
Yeah, I will say it depends on the day that you ask me. What I will say about that is you do have to make that transition, and we've done a pretty good job the last couple of years. We've hired a leadership team of people who are amazing, and that has helped tremendously. But there is no substitute for inspiration. So when you're trying to lead people, you think about what they're going through on their day-to-day, right? Like think about what they're reading in the news, like what we're reading in the news right now. Like it's not good, right? It's doom and gloom, and doom and gloom gets more clicks, so we see more of that, right? And that's tough, right? And so you think about like, well, if you have an opportunity to inspire somebody for what they're doing, it can make up for a lot of other faults, right? And so even if you're a little sloppy on your bookkeeping, or your marketing's not that tight, or whatever it may be for you, if you can inspire the people that you work for, that the values that the company believes in and that you believe in personally are true, and that you care desperately about them, and that they need to care, and that they're part of something, like that goes a long way. And so I'll give you an example. We the beginning of this year, we changed our strategy a little bit to become more inclusive for our authors. We built this membership platform, and we want to move from being a very great advertising partner for an authors to being able to serve them in a lot more different ways. And that required us to do some software, but it really required us to think differently, right? And so we were going to present to the whole team this sort of shift in strategy January. And we're trying to figure out like how to communicate it. And I draw like as a hobby. And so I'm sitting there doodling on this, and we'd just been to Disney World, I think. And the map, like the sort of fantasy style map of the theme park.
I love those maps.
So cool, right?
Those out at parks.
Yeah, and I was really inspired by that. And so I just started doodling, and I came up with this sort of theme park map for our strategy, right? And it was, I colored it and I put a logo, and like it was just my pencil scratchings. And I'm like, this is not good. Like this is my idea, but let's get an artist to actually, make it. I talked to my wife, my co-founder. She's like, it's great, leave it as is. And then we presented that to the team, and everybody loved it, right? And I was really inspired. And like, even though it was kind of like, it's not that good, but that doesn't matter, right? What mattered is like, here's the vision, right? Like, we're going to have this place. Here's an analogy you can use to tell your parents about what you're doing at work, right? Here's a visual that brings it to life. And that had a huge impact.
What were some of the little, because the theme parks, they all have little neighborhoods kind of. So what were some of the things that you built into your business theme park?
Yeah. So, our business is about authors and readers and books, right? So we have the town center, which is where our logo was. There's Reader River, right, which is running through the town, and there's Opportunity Island across the way, and the practice field where you're, honing your craft as a writer and some things like that. And this is all real whimsical stuff that didn't have any tangible, like we weren't actually going to necessarily build any of this, right? It was all conceptual. And so it's sort of like, it's not a plan. It's the inspiration, it's the dream, and people really resonate with that. And I think you can't underestimate that how little of that people get in their day-to-day life. And so when you're trying to lead them, if you can give them a little bit of that, whether it's, 3 or 4 minutes of a speech, whether it's something visual, it's something you write, you have to take advantage of those opportunities, because that little sketch probably took me an hour or two. And we've got a lot of mileage out of it, but I rarely spend that time being like, okay, how can I inspire the team? Right? How can I craft this? Because I'm so busy. And I think as leaders, we have to find the time to do that. And it pays off exponentially when you actually pull it off.
Well, that's really interesting. And, so a lot of people will, we all have our own talents. So, some people might be more comfortable with the written word, other, with art, other with, with speaking. But as do our employees absorb information in different ways. So, maybe you could have taken exactly what you put in a little visual map and written it into a vision statement. And, maybe that would resonate with some people on the team, but maybe others would, read it and forget it, and it really wouldn't have an impact. So it's kind of interesting to think about just the different ways of communicating and making sure that we're really trying to connect with how people absorb information.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And everybody, for me, nothing's real until I can see a picture, right? So like if I can design a diagram, or if I can draw a picture, or until I, put something on a whiteboard. So, but not everybody's different, right? So for some people, that's a spreadsheet. For some people, that's, to your point, like a paragraph or a speech or whatever. And so I think, every entrepreneur is different. You just got to find your voice, right? And what is your medium for conveying inspiration, and build down on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. One of the things that you mentioned to me before when we were speaking is just the idea of entrepreneurs getting kind of caught up in self-doubt. So tell me about, to what extent do you feel like mindset is a factor in growing your business, and how does an entrepreneur make sure that they have the right mindset in order to be as positively impactful as they can?
Yeah, it's super hard. So like there's a lot of stuff about mindset entrepreneurs out there, and it's all pretty good. But it's what I think it sometimes misses is how difficult that actually is. What you mentioned is really important, right? So every day you might get hit by a truck, right? Or it might be a great day. And like that's the roller coaster. That's what you signed up for. And so one of the things that I've done that's helped me a lot is kind of what I call like making peace with the hard, right? So like entrepreneurship is hard. Like stuff happens that you cannot predict. The responsibility that you bear is heavy and sometimes crushing. And you have to sort of make peace with that being your journey, right? Like it's never going to be over. It's never going to get easier, right? If you do it right, it probably gets harder. And you have to kind of make peace with that. And I think, candidly, I sometimes struggle with it as well, right? But that's sort of what I tell myself is like, you got to make peace with this difficult choice that you've made to do this thing. And also you got to reflect on the good things, right? So like I zoom out and I'm like, hey, there's 15 people that have a job that would not have existed if I had started this company. That's amazing, right? And there's, tens of thousands of authors whose career is better because they're selling books. Like that's awesome. And so sometimes when somebody made a mistake, you realize you hired the wrong person, or you trained them poorly, or you did, what all these things, these mistakes that we all make, it can feel really daunting. And I think you have to be able to make peace with that hard and be able to zoom out and look at like the good that you're doing and that you're getting, because as leaders and as entrepreneurs, we do get a lot out of it, and I think sometimes the mess of daily life can have you lose sight of that. But you get to be a leader, you get to build something, and those are really special things to be grateful for.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's interesting. I think we as entrepreneurs, I'm not going to say perfectionists, but we're always entrepreneurs, just that, their minds are going a million miles a minute. And if, just when it comes to strategy, it's like, if A doesn't work, well, I can think of B, C, D, E, F, and G. Like, so there's so many different choices. And, it's always like, go, 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 go. And then sometimes when something goes wrong, like, let's say, one of the things that you were mentioning, I thought was interesting is, you work with a client, things can happen to their business that are, not within your control. And that could be tough. That could cause you to reflect and go, wow, did I mess something up here? And it's like, it's kind of trying to get through to that, to the other side of that, and having the mindset of, I guess, taking a step back and not internalizing everything. Because being an entrepreneur is a very personal thing. Do you find?
Very much so. I mean, it's very linked to your personal identity, right? And especially if you've done it for a little while and people know that that's what you're doing. It's funny because when we first started this business, I was, I loved my job that I had before at Reverb. It was great people, cool product, everything. And I was like, if this doesn't work out, I can always go back, right? I can always I'm sure if I can go crawling back, ask for a job, and I would get one, right? And then at some point you're like, I don't know if I can do that. Not because they won't have me, but my identity is now so linked to this thing Like,
Yeah.
who am I if I give this up? And that can be, heavy, but I think we have to wear it, and you have to make peace with it. Otherwise, it's going to tear you apart.
I agree. I spent many years in corporate America before becoming an entrepreneur, and there's times when I'll speak with an organization who is a little bit more on that, I won't say not to the Fortune 500 level that I worked before, but definitely more corporate, and I get chills sometimes. So I'm like, oh my God, no, I can never go back. Having your own freedom to be able to make the decisions that are the right thing is just, that would be very hard to let go. Let's talk a little bit more about people. That's sort of been a sort of an ongoing thread throughout this discussion, but you have a really interesting approach to managing you have a very interesting approach to managing people, and we're in the face of just crazy times. I think any business owner that I've spoken to at any time in the past would say, oh yes, getting good people is so hard. But now it's really, really challenging, I think, with what we're seeing with the Great Resignation. And it's becoming even in the face of a challenging economy, it's a really interesting trend that I think we've seen since the pandemic. But talk to me a little bit about your philosophy when it comes to hiring and retaining, and maybe not retaining great talent.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. It's one that we think a lot about. So, we're a small company. We do not have the resources that, Google or Facebook does. So we cannot compete on a lot of factors. And we have a great place to work, but we get a lot done. It's fast paced. It's a startup, right? That's kind of it's 8 years old, but that we still have that culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that we noticed during this sort of Great Resignation period is, whatever, it's this global event, it's COVID, everybody reevaluates what's going on, back to inspiration, like we were talking about earlier. People are like, am I inspired by this? And I think there are some things going on that people are like, well, that's inspiring to me, but what I'm doing now is not. And I think you can fight that as an employer. You can try to, pay people more or keep them, but like, that's a losing battle. Like, you're just not going to win if somebody's not jazzed up about what they're doing. And so we built this program we call the Next Chapter program. And it's been borderline transformational for us and how we run the business. And so the way the program works is when somebody's ready to leave our company, when they're like, I'm not feeling it anymore, I'm not inspired, I want to go do something else, for whatever reason, we say, that's okay. Like, you can come and talk to us about that. You don't have to take fake sick days to interview. And then you give us 2 weeks and everybody's scrambled, everybody's upset, you're upset, we're upset. It's not enough transition time. And then everybody's a little miffed after you leave. And like, that's what most of America does. And like, we hate that. And as a small company, turnover is really expensive. Mm-hmm. And so what we decided is we were going to roll with it and like coach people and help them. And so we have people, like, if they say, hey, I'm in the Next Chapter program, that means I'm looking for a job. And everybody knows about it. We talk about it openly at the staff meeting. It's no big deal. Ricky and I like help that person find a new job. Like, we coach them on their resume, we reach out to our networks, we try to place them, right? And so what that does is two things. One, for the employee, they actually get this incredible amount of support for a very hard decision. They had to make a courageous decision, which is say, like, I don't want to work for you anymore, right? That's hard. So you got to reward that and normalize it, which we're doing. And the trade is, hey, you can interview. If like we have a meeting and you can't make it because you have an interview, you just say that out loud. It's not a big deal. And in return, you give us a much longer transition period. So we're paying you, we're giving you health insurance while you're looking for a job. You stay for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that. And that's usually plenty of time to find somebody to replace them, right? And then the transition period also is a lot more amicable because that person's really grateful. Often we find them a better job that's more in line with what they care about. So they're super happy to train the person who's coming in because, they feel it's been such a positive experience.
Genuine. Yeah.
And then, it's not altogether altruistic, right? We're also building this amazing network of wordy alumni, people that have come and worked for us for a few years, have left on great terms, and we've helped them. I'm hopeful someday we'll get some of them back. And also, it's a cool community of people, and they have nothing but good things to say about the company, right? And the company is totally, essentially risk-free, because if you come and you like it, you stay, you get promoted, whatever. If you come and you don't like it, then you go in the next chapter and we help you find something that's better for you. And it's really changed the way I think about turnover. And our turnover, what I would call sort of like, problematic turnover, has basically gone to zero. So when we have somebody go in the next chapter, it's not disruptive anymore. It's just normal.
So, and it's reached the point, it sounds like, where even I'm curious about the people who are left behind. So when you're working with someone and they say, oh, okay, I'm in the next chapter, that doesn't encourage other employees to think, oh, well, maybe I should too.
I mean, maybe, but that hasn't happened to us so far. And so, when we hire people, we hire them based on a set of values that are in line with the way we actually run the company. So we've gotten pretty good at it. And the truth is, our business is it's online marketing, email, and it's books and authors, right? And so somewhere in that world, that has to get you excited. And if none of those things are exciting for you, that's fine. It doesn't mean you're not a good person. It just means this is maybe not a great spot for you. And so now, everybody that's here is really jazzed about, one of those things, right? They're really into what we're doing here, and it makes for a really efficient, good system. And things tend to move well when everybody kind of knows what's going on and wants to be there.
Interesting. And you mentioned values and interviewing for values. So talk to me a little bit more about that. How do you, everyone's always on their best behavior during interviews, and you can background checks and you can have multiple people talk to them. But what is your process for making sure that you do hire the right talent that does align with the values that you're trying to establish as a business owner?
Yep. So that is definitely something that's in EOS. And so we just do it almost exactly how the book says, but essentially we have our values, we've got 6 of them. And then the interview questions that we ask everybody, whether you're an engineer or you're starting out in an operations specialist, is what the questions that you get asked all point back to a value. So you start with the value and say, hey, what's a question that's going to get at this value? I'll give you an example. So our business, we work with authors. Words and grammar are extremely important. Details are paramount, right? You cannot miss these things. And so that's very much part of our culture. And so sometimes that is a little monotonous, right? You have to grind through and double check a million details, right? And our value is called cook the burger, just get it done. And one of the questions is tell me about a time you've done something that was important but not very interesting. And so what happens if somebody's oh my gosh, I'll tell you this time it's terrible, I had to do that, and that's a terrible person for us. Doesn't mean they're a terrible person, but written word media is a bad place for them. But if they're oh yeah, well, I went through and I sorted all these papers, it was really important, or just if they have a good attitude about doing some task, all of a sudden that's a check mark, right? And so, we have a bunch like that, but that's really an important way to do it. And it's amazing what happens when you have people who, they're from different backgrounds, diversity wise, but the values are all the same. And that really makes a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. It becomes like a family then, I would imagine.
Yeah, a little bit.
So as the old saying goes, hindsight is always 2020. But the great thing about consuming content like podcasts and hearing from you is that I think we have the opportunity to hopefully learn from the hindsight of others and not make the same mistakes. So let's say if you were to go back and talk to yourself 10 or 15 years ago, what is one great piece of advice that you think would have saved you a lot of heartaches and headaches when it came to growing your business?
Wow, that's a really good question. 15 years ago, trying to think. So, when you look back on it, I think a lot of times, so that was probably about the time I was getting out of business school. And I learned a lot and I felt really smart, really prepared. Not sure that was accurate, but that's how I felt. And I would say, I spend a lot of time thinking about things. I think anybody that's an entrepreneur does, right? You're kind of, like you said, like your head's always going, right? You're always trying to think about like how this could work. What could I do? I think being open to other people's opinions and specifically, I would say reading. So like consuming podcasts is great. Obviously, I'm incredibly biased. I run a book company. I love books.
If you didn't say books, I would be surprised.
Yeah, but really books is for, me and some people, but like podcasts for others or articles, whatever it is, like be open to other people's ideas. Your ideas are incredible and they're yours, but there are others out there, and listening to them and consuming them can make you better at what you do. And I think a much younger version of myself was a little brash and a little overly sure of myself, and taking notes from other people very genuinely and reading what other people have written, I think would have made a bigger difference, maybe gotten me to where I was a little faster.
I think that's a great piece of advice. Ferol, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Where can people contact you if they'd like to learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. So on LinkedIn, it's linkedin.com/in/Ferol. If you're a small business or an entrepreneur, you can follow me there. If you want anything with books and reading, it's writtenwordmedia.com, and you can see everything that we do for authors and for readers there.
Wonderful. Well, I wish you all the best of luck with your business. I really enjoyed our conversation and look forward to speaking to you again.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.